There we go. I'm Red. I'm Russell of Collinwood, Joel Sains, joined by Morgan Brown at Magical Rod. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing good. Really glad to be here. Was kind of honored to get the invite. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We're here to discuss the southern branch of the Collins family. So, do you think there is one?
I love that idea. I love that possibility. As a matter of fact, I like the idea of there could be multiple branches, especially in a modern day setting. Uh, as well as the potential for, I've been thinking about even maybe even a secret branch, a branch that's unknown to the rest of the Collins family but still exists.
Right. That's the thing too. A buddy of mine who had gotten into Dark Shadows. He said, "What advice can you give me?" And I said, "Whatever you do not fully trust that family history book."
Yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, even we really see it, I think, when Victoria travels back in time and has the book with her, she's experienced the history, experiencing it and seeing how it's different from what's written, you know?
This ain't a normal person's family history book. It's like, wait, what?
I know that's one thing I love about Dark Shadows is for me, uh, uh, I always connected with it in this way that I was like, oh man, I feel like my family's so similar in ways to the Collins. And one of those is that we have all of these, family legends that it's like, oh, this part of it might be true, or later on you find out none of it's true, but half the family still thinks it is and won't let go of it, and there's always that. When you're looking at especially a personal history that there really isn't a lot of evidence for. There's just stories in the oral history.
Yeah, it's like you have all this written stuff down. She's trusting that book, and in a sense, I can't blame her because in every way, though Vicky is like one of the family, she has been through the trials and tribulations by this point in her life with most of them, with Elizabeth, with Roger, with David. You know, I won't say so much with Barnabas because Barnabas was like fresh on arrival, and but she does trust him because of his last name being a Collins.
Right.
So she figures, you know what, they wrote somebody wrote this book from experience, from the words of the Collins family, so I can believe them. Even though I know I've been through some rough patches with some of them, she sort of loves them in a way of I can trust them, but in a way, though my favorite character is Victoria Winters, it's like you're trusting them a little too much, girl.
Right. I almost see it partially as her kind of it's part of her way of becoming part of the family, is realizing that some of that is you uphold the family history whether or not it's really true, because you see that with especially Elizabeth and Roger, how the Collins name and the picture of who the Collins is fairly important, even though they may know the real side to it.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's like what really gives you a telltale sign of how things mess. A small hint, and it's very small, is Joan Bennett's words of she tells Vicky, okay, you want to go looking into the past? It isn't as romantic as you think it is. It's dangerous. And that's the past was dangerous. So going off the lies that we all know exist within her book, right? Do you think there's just members of like of the branch that just aren't written in that book at all?
That's kind of how I would take it. That's more. I started thinking about it, and I was like, even if when they were coming over from England, maybe there were siblings with them there that just after that trip, they're kind of like, you know what, you go do your thing, we're gonna go do ours. good luck. We'll talk to you maybe in the future if we need to. But there may be even a family disagreement there that created a split in the family, that once they got to the new world, they separated and kind of went their own ways, you know?
I'm with you. There could be just because families often get separated by time and distance. Even back, way back then. Like now, it's a little more, I won't say impossible, but harder because of our technology and such. But families just have quarrels with one another to the point of it's either so distant that they haven't talked to each other in so many years so they don't know if one's alive or dead. And I could see that especially with the Collins family. And here's my question for you. Do you think there's a branch of the Collins family members that did something so bad, so heinous, they can't even write it in the history book?
Oh, I would imagine that the Collins family history is littered with those events, whether or not it's the family we know, or an extended family. One thing that I've wondered about, and it's definitely not covered in the history book, is it seems like maybe not an unbroken interest through the family, but there's always been, at least periodically, people that were interested in the occult or mysticism and that sort of thing throughout the family. And that's definitely something that's not talked about really or written about. And seems like they try to keep that quiet, you know?
Yeah. There's a lot of unspokenness with the Collins family, especially. They there's just things they don't necessarily say, and I'm not meaning just Joshua not telling people he loves them.
Right.
he just There's things throughout that family that don't get said. It's like, and you're left wondering, like, well, wait a second, you got this whole branch here of Joshua, Jeremiah, this one, that. Like, what about these other people here? Why aren't you mentioning them too much? It's like, why aren't you say about, and here's Jen Bennett's character way in the beginning when they first really start talking about Josette. Says about how Josette's ghost rescued her aunt or something,
Right.
but that's all you hear about her. And it's like, well, wait a second.
Right.
Okay, that aunt obviously would have had kids, you would think. So why don't we hear more about said aunt? Is there something just Elizabeth doesn't want to bring up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny because I really have been thinking about, like, as a Dark Shadows fan, I guess I've had a couple of burning questions in my mind lately, that when I came across your videos about the Southern branch, made a lot of different parts click for me. But one is, I definitely, if they're going to redo the series, how are they going to do it?
Right.
That's, I think, a thought on a lot of our minds. And the other is the perpetual question of, who is Victoria Winter's parents?
Right.
And is she actually related to the Collins, and that's one of those family history things that is not included, certainly, in the official history, but I would love to see explored in a unique and newer way if they redo the series.
Right. The there's so many mysteries surrounding the Collins family. And I was talking about this on another podcast too, that they may have had ties with the royal family. Now, not necessarily meaning they were royals themselves, but the Collins family have always had money. And when you get into class of people and their wealth, poor, wealth usually interacted with the wealthy. So maybe there were ties between the Collins family and the royal family, kings and stuff and queens of England. And so maybe there was some sort of connection there where this is sort of why I've said Naomi, whatever her maiden name was a pirate, because I feel Naomi Usually when you're promised to somebody back way back in those days, usually it didn't start at a teenager. I'm not saying they took a little girl and made her marry at that age, no. But they promised them at that age, and then when they got old enough to that they could marry, they married them. So she may have been promised to him when she was just a small child, say 7 or 8.
Right. I think it's an interesting idea, and especially the royal family connection. I think again, you could maybe make that tie through their interest in occultism. You know, there's a long history of royal families and even presidents and things using astrologers and various occultists, and that could even be something that maybe early on, if the Collins didn't necessarily have money, but had that kind of information, it could bring them in connection with people that did have money and could give them opportunities. I've wondered about why did they really come to America, and I've wondered if there couldn't be a connection there. I've heard some discussion about the idea of if the land of Collinsport, what's now Collinsport, could have had something that was maybe a draw to them, maybe a mystical quality or something that they were harnessing or coming to America to explore and harness, you know?
When I did the Leviathan arc with Patrick McRae, huge shout out to him. He was saying that what if the Collins family members, the earliest members, were members of the Leviathan, and that's where the Leviathan people sort of pointed to that place and said, "Go here." And I could sort of see it because, for those who don't know, the Leviathan people aren't from this planet. They're aliens, and so now we don't know exactly when they came to Earth, but I would assume it was probably long before human existence, and they just waited for humans to sort of start sprouting around and corrupt
Right.
them.
I don't know. I saw part of that discussion. I didn't get a chance to finish it. I want to go back and finish it, but I have always kind of felt that the Leviathans, because they seem to have this sort of time travel ability. You know, they appear in the past and bring Barnabas up to the future, and I almost have this idea of maybe they're working from a future point, going back in time to try to influence things to their liking. Uh, and I started to wonder, could maybe they have been the ones that first helped and instigated Judah Zachary and his cult? And
Yeah,
maybe the Collins coming here, kind of got in the way of those plans
yeah,
and somehow been extended up.
yeah. That's an interesting theory. There's a lot of great theories. Like, it, nothing is really wrong or right. You know what I mean? It's like we don't know. Like, we really don't know, because I gotta believe the Collinses. They didn't. Here's what I'll say: the Collinses, they were wealthy prior to America. You know what I mean? So where their wealth is sort of where Sky Rumson's wealth was dependent on the Leviathan being partnered with them? Was that the same for the Collins family, or did they have their own wealth, and then the Leviathan stepped in and said, "Oh, hey, by the way," or like you're saying, did the Leviathan travel back in time and sort of intervene at certain parts?
Right. I started thinking like if there was almost if the Collins had this history of an interest in occultism, if there couldn't be kind of a dichotomy between this sort of like cult that's trying to do things for evil, but maybe they were working for kind of like a more I don't. That's where I don't want to cast the Collins as too positive. I almost think that the way they would look at it is like, well, if we have the power, then we can know that it's done right, but
Right.
that's not necessarily right, you know?
Right. There's a world of possibilities. Something I was talking about too was England has interesting history. No one no one knew who Jack the Ripper was. What if and the rumor was always that a prostitute got pregnant with a member of the royal family, and Jack the Ripper was paid to find that prostitute by killing prostitutes. But he couldn't just kill one,
Right.
and that person ended up being the one who was the pregnant one. He had to kill others. So he does. Now, there are only so many prostitutes killed in the Jack the Ripper case, and that's what makes it interesting, too. And one of them was pregnant.
Okay.
So, was Jack the Ripper perhaps a Collins, a doctor?
I in watching your other podcasts, I started thinking about that and thinking about like how would I like to see that done if we were going to connect that. And the way my mind went with it is I would love to see it kind of flipped in a sort of way. It made me start thinking of Charity Trask and when she gets kind of possessed by Pansy Faye.
Yep.
And the idea of almost Charity being so repressed and so tight on herself, but Pansy being kind of, wild and all of that. What if there was a female character that had that kind of polar personality, and maybe her spirit like went out and possessed women to release her urges, but then when she did, it felt so guilty that it would kill them. So there was no, physical male killer. It was
Right.
her doing it kind of maybe even in an astral projecting kind of state or something,
I get what you're saying, sort of where here's this woman who's sort of able to kill people without, there being a physical presence in a weird way.
Right. Right. Almost like maybe when she was sleeping, her spirit would go out and fulfill these urges, and she would have dreams about it or something,
Right, and she wakes up and they're dead, and she's sort of like, no, that's just because you could pass something off as coincidence, right?
Right.
Oh, that's just a coincidence. Like one would be a coincidence,
Right.
then the next one is like, wait.
After right, once the bodies start piling up, and you're like, hang on.
I like that. I like that. That's
Yeah.
cool. Do you think that there's myths and lores in the South that these branches could easily be connected to?
I do. So one of the things that we had kind of talked about on Dean and Lynn's podcast are the caverns underneath Collinwood.
Right.
And I started thinking about your ideas of the Collins being connected to the Mothman.
Right.
I really like the area of Point Pleasant because it seems very remote. There could be a remote area out there that the new branch the Collins family is in.
Mm-hmm.
I started thinking about, well, what are the Collins we know are in the fishing industry. Mining. It seems very natural that they could go into mining, get down in those caves, find who knows what. Maybe the Mothman was an entity they found down there and maybe even made a deal with, and that's what's been supporting their wealth this whole time. Another idea that I had was I started thinking about other like folklore or myths that could maybe be brought into that. I think you had mentioned something about specifically like water creatures or water spirits that could be brought in. And I believe there's I think it's an Irish folk tale about, I think they're called Selkies, and they are, when they're in the water, they're like an otter, but when they come out, they take off their otter skin and turn into a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
There are, from what I understand, otters down in that area. And I was like, what if they came across from Europe somehow and got involved with the Collins family, you know?
No, mythical creatures or mythical beings could definitely be a part of a lot of this, really. That's sort of the wildness of it. Like, with Dark Shadows, there's no limit to this. That's the insanity of it.
Right.
And with the Mothman, I would say that now Morgantown and West Virginia and all that, it's one big mine. It's huge in mining. So you're right. The Collins family could have easily got into mining and either maybe found a Mothman, or maybe they found something that could be made into a serum, and they chose, instead of experimenting on someone else, maybe one of them chose to experiment on themselves and acts and didn't really know what the side effects of said serum would be, and
Right.
they became a Mothman.
Right. Yes,
it's like,
totally.
it's like that's and again, it's just like there's no limit to what could go on with a southern branch of the Collins family.
Absolutely.
you know I gotta ask you, when did you get into Dark Shadows?
It's funny. I think it's one of those things that kind of for me connected my mind to the family relation to the Collins and to Dark Shadows. I grew up in Southeast Alaska on an island, and all of our extended family lived down here in Illinois, where I'm at now, and we really didn't have much contact with them. My parents were always like, we love our family, but back then, honestly, long distance cost a lot, travel cost a lot, things like that. So we just didn't have a lot of contact. But when I was 7 years old, my grandmother was in the hospital. She was dying. And
Hmm.
so we took my first plane ride and my first trip out of the state and my first time meeting family to come back here to Illinois for this kind of dark event. Um, while we were here in the Walmarts, they have the big bins in the middle, and back in '84 when this was, they had those also, and they had the some of the Dark Shadows VHS tapes. And our selection up there in Ketchikan was very limited, you know what I mean? So for a kid, I was like, oh man, I don't know what this is, but it looks great. I'm gonna get this and a Godzilla and some of these cartoons. After everything was done, took them back home and started watching them. And I believe the first one I had that I watched was when Victoria goes back in time. So I saw that transition between modern day going back.
Okay.
And then one of the other tapes that I had, I believe I had two, was late parallel time when they're also in period dress. And at that time, I was kind of like, oh, geez, I guess they just never got back to the future, you
Right.
know? And then over the years, I would live places where maybe the library had them or a local video rental place had them. And I kind of worked my way through the series. And when I moved here to Illinois about 10 years ago, I started actually collecting the DVDs and working my way through the whole series and watching some of the interviews and just kind of getting more and more into it over the years. But yeah, I love Dark Shadows. I feel like I've had a connection with them for a long time, kind of through my formative years, even though I only saw certain episodes just repeatedly.
That's great. I like that. I love that.
Yeah.
Do you think that if there's branches who maybe have been disconnected by the Collins family and they know they've been sort of maybe banished or disconnected, do you think they could be plotting a revenge against the Collins family we know of?
I absolutely do. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I started thinking about after watching your podcasts was, so I love the idea of a southern branch. What if we went a little bit further south? And I
Right.
was like, what if when Barnabas and Angelique had their, night together in Martinique,
Right.
what if they had conceived a child?
Right.
And maybe, the timing with her leaving Martinique and stuff, I was like, well, she couldn't have really been pregnant. People would have known. She's a witch. Her
Yeah.
mother possibly had powers. I was like, I think they very easily could have found someone to sort of magic that over and like a cuckoo's egg implant it in another woman. And then I was like, well, but would they inherit Angelique's powers? And then I started thinking, what if when Angelique cursed Barnabas, this maybe, teenage child or something like that also became a vampire
Yeah.
and then had the immortality and the powers and was searching for who his family was, much like Victoria Winters, to find the Collins family and start being like, hey, you left me out in the cold. What the hell?
No, there could definitely be something like that. We don't know. We don't. We know that Angelique and Barnabas had a love affair in Martinique. To the folks at home who want that explained in a short way, they had sex. So, yes, yes. Before Barnabas and Josette officially met and hooked up, you know, Angelique and Barnabas, yes, they had sex. They got it on in Martinique. But so it's funny you say it because I could see that. I could see like a child maybe being conceived and just Angelique never said anything. Do I think she the only thing I'll say is that there's a periodic moment where in 1840 when they're sort of being upfront with each other because Barnabas at this point I have to trust her. I think that would have been the moment where Angelique goes, okay, okay, there's something I gotta tell you, Bart.
Well, it makes me wonder though if Angelique would even think of it. You know what I mean? If to her
Yep,
that child was something that was just forgotten about.
yep,
Because if anything, it would be a distraction from it would distract Barnabas from his love of her.
yep,
It would become about the child, not about her.
yep.
So I could
True.
almost see her just sort of not even thinking about it and just being like it's done with. But that child then growing and possibly if he had the immortality and things like that, he could potentially grow his own empire over the next 200 years, into where we're at now, and have his own large family.
Yeah. I could see literally there being maybe a whole group of Collins family members living throughout the South, maybe in New Orleans and in Alabama and Georgia, especially if you take Louisiana, that's had all this myth, New Orleans, and maybe a Collins family member is literally living in a secret underground crypt in the Collins, in the cemetery of New Orleans, has their own laboratory, their own setup, and is
Right,
doing
right.
God knows what.
Well, I was thinking too, what if somebody was, doing some kind of scientific experimenting and started to discover something about the Collins family? I started to think like, what if they discovered that maybe the Collins bloodline has some sort of ability to like access genetic memory?
Yeah,
And maybe that would even explain sort of like the going back in time but people looking the same, is sort of that idea of like, there's this genetic commonality but we're experiencing what they did.
yeah. I love a friend of mine, well, a buddy of mine, John Philip Betancourt. He did a Dark Shadows blog for 5 years, and I love how he gave Victoria Winters the legitimate power to travel back in time at will. And I think that made a world of sense for him to do that. I could see like this whole again because we don't know how many actual members are literally out there. We know of the members we know of, thank God,
Right,
but we don't know like how many members are living here, how many members are living there, and we
right.
don't know what they've been through because we just never hear of them because again, with Dark Shadows, the beautiful thing is a lot of things just weren't planned. But in the same sense of what we've heard of well, here was this ant that got rescued by a ghost. Here was this ant that Carolyn went with. And it's like, okay, why aren't we hearing more of these, descendants, other
Right.
descendants that are we know are out there? And okay, if we know these ones are out there, what about the ones we don't know? So if there could be literally Collinses upon Collinses, hell, maybe they don't even have the last name Collins anymore because they're just either that shamed or that banished by the family.
Right, right. Or they just chose to, you had a end of a family line that was a woman, and she chose to take her husband's name because that's tradition, and
Yep.
just did away with the Collins hyphenation. Um,
Yep.
I like the idea of, especially with the idea of a modern show, and if they were going to do it, I would love to see something like maybe Carolyn still in Collinwood, now kind of taking her mother's place,
Yep.
an exploration of a southern branch with maybe even the farther south plotting son. I thought I would love to see David go to the Pacific Northwest, start a timber barony out there as part of the Collins family, uh, and then to where would Barnabas be?
Yep.
Where is Barnabas in this day and age? Is he still involved? Has he washed his hands of the family and walked away? You know,
I've I've been talking about, I think, the Barnabas, like, because if you're Mark B. Perry, his series is supposed to be a sequel series to the original. So 2000, if you start Dark Shadows, sequeling it in 2021, to me, because Barnabas is already supposed to be, you know, over 200 years old, but we know he's now mortal in 1970. By the end of the series, he's no longer a vampire. So to me, Barnabas would be dead. He'd be
yeah,
gone. But, when you get into Dr. Julie Hoffman and Quentin, I gotta believe they had a plan. They had a scheme of, you know, what if shit starts up again? What if shit starts up for the Collins family, and who's gonna be there for them?
right,
Who's the one person that's always sort of been there for them, and that's Barnabas.
right,
So I gotta believe, and here's the thing: in the series, this happens. There is something that happens where Julia, when she starts first meeting Barnabas, she takes samples of his blood.
right.
So, but okay, where are those samples? She probably kept them.
I think it's very natural that there would be a secret stash of
Yeah,
Julia's samples, notes, journals that she would leave just for, if nothing else, just for future posterity. I think she would be like that.
yeah, and to me, there's one person who would still be alive because he's still a werewolf and his painting's still intact, and that would be Quentin, who you would trust with this shit. So he would have it. He would also know where Barnabas is buried because, well, he would have that sort of knowledge, and she would either A, tell him, or B, maybe he helped bury him. And maybe he's secretly living in Collinsport under another name, maybe Marcus Graham, and maybe he's watching the family through the lens of his camera. Maybe he's a photographer, and
Right.
he sees something that he knows isn't good and isn't natural. I mean, Quentin has seen some shit. So he knows, well, I gotta go bring back Barnabas now. And he takes the vial of blood where he hid it, goes to the coffin and pops the lid, pours the blood, and
Oh,
Barnabas is back as a vampire.
I can totally see that.
And I think that's the thing. that's something I'm excited for, because something I've told another friend of mine is, when you're not just, this isn't like Ben Cross to me played his own version of Barnabas. This isn't someone playing their own version. This is somebody literally playing Jonathan Frid's Barnabas Collins.
Right.
And that's gonna be the most interesting thing. Like, okay, how are they gonna do that? Are we gonna, that's what I'm most excited for too. I cannot wait to see how they pull all this grand thing off, and how they sort of lay out this story. How is this, like season one? How's it laid out? Who's your new
Yes.
characters? You know?
Well, I think you were talking with is it Chris, the Dark Shadows tweeter? And I think he was saying, modern audiences are so much more savvy with things like American Horror Story, and our storytelling has just evolved too, to where we see and we can accept things like characters playing multiple parts,
Yep.
multiple time periods going at the same time. I would love to see, just recently, in thinking about, I have my own theories about who Victoria's parentage is, but I kind of was making that connection, that I was like, oh wait, Elizabeth and Roger's father was Jameson. I was
Yep.
like, oh my god, I would love to see Jameson Collins in the 20s, a Great Gatsby occultist with tons of childhood trauma,
Yeah, I like that.
Oh, I would like to see too. One thing I've thought for a long time, and I'm not sure if they did a modern series where they branched out in the family, this idea kind of goes by the wayside. But in the past, one of the things that I've really thought is, I'm like, with the movies and the remakes that I've seen, one of the things that I really feel that they felt short on was, to me, Collinwood is a character of its own. As a matter of fact, it's probably the lead character.
Yeah.
I started thinking about it, and I was like, it's the only character we see in every episode. You know what I mean? Collinwood is the staple through every time period, time band, parallel time, and I feel that that's never been focused on enough. But maybe they could even do that with, maybe they're part of the multiple branches is multiple Collinwoods, especially if they are built on, maybe where the families settle is dependent on these sort of mystical sites, and they're drawn to them or something, tons of material for speculation in Dark Shadows.
That's the thing too. Like, was they say the first Collinwood, the original Collinwood, is the old house.
Mhm.
And I love that. Don't get me wrong, but I don't buy that either, because you're telling me this family, this rich, wealthy family who was from England, from Europe, didn't have a Collinwood over there? No,
Right.
they most likely did, and that's because Barnabas says about a friend named Nigel, or an uncle Nigel, that lived in the countryside or something. And I'm like, well, wait a second. The name is real, but it was from 100 years ago. So Barnabas didn't just pull a name out of a hat. He gave a real name,
Right.
who ended up dying. So that lets me know the Collins family existence in England, literally, there's something there, because they probably built the first Collinwood is probably over there somewhere.
Right. Right. And that's, I mean, you have all of the British Isles kind of littered with potential mystical sites, or convergences of ley lines, stone circles, all of those kinds of things that could be drawn in and connected to them, maybe finding those sites here in America to harness that power.
Yeah.
Uh, But maybe that was why they got tied up with the royal family, was to help the royal family find those sites over there so they could better establish their power, you know?
Yeah, could be. Again, there's a lot of possibility. I would love to see, like, I've mentioned this, I think, on two separate podcasts now, where Laura Parker, you have these people who are all in robes, and they're at the Stonehenge, and you they're all standing around, and this one person pulls the hood back, and here it's Laura Parker, but she's not playing Angelique. And you see this snake. She's holding a snake, and she raises the machete and says, "With this sacrifice of the member of the Leviathan, we bring you back, Judah Zachary," and cuts the head off, and Judah comes back.
See, and
And,
I think that idea of the Leviathans being connected to that original cult, I like that idea somehow, that, you know, because later on we see the cult take on this kind of greater, almost Illuminati kind of quality, you know, that's very, then gets projected even more when it's the Leviathan, you know, it almost seems like a progression like that through time.
I think here's what I'll say, and I agree with what Patrick said. I think, for my mind, the Leviathan's leader, I don't feel it's Judah. I feel their leader is the devil. We only see Diablos.
Diablos, yeah. Which I love Diablos. There's the one scene with him and Nicholas, and Nicholas says something to him along the lines of like I never want to come back here again, and Diablos says no one ever does. And I always think, oh, I think he's kind of lonely.
Right? Hello. It's a Hell is a cold and lonely place.
Yeah.
That's what Diablos is telling you. It's beautiful. And that's the thing. It's like, if you're gonna have the devil, and even now that's something they could have. You don't have to let me know that someone is the devil. At least not right away. You could have the devil watching in the wings, sort of watching things unfold, and then he makes himself known. Of, okay, you want a war with me? Yeah, you stopped me once. No, not this time. And then things start happening that are bad, and he's causing them. Satan doesn't necessarily need the Leviathan, but he's using them because he can.
Right.
And I do think there needs to be like an ultimate baddie. And to me, there's no bigger baddie than the devil.
I started thinking tonight about, and these are all very fresh thoughts that I haven't had much time to really contemplate, but the idea of, so if the Collinses were harnessing that energy and they kind of took it away from the cult that then became the Leviathans, who tried to make Jeb, could the Collins have prevented, like, could Jeb have been sort of like their plan B? Like, it's near Collinwood that he was born, but not on Collinwood.
Right.
So I started thinking about my idea for Victoria Winters is, I like the idea that Betty Hanscom is her mother.
Yeah.
But what if she was conceived through possibly even some sort of a ritual that I'm blanking on his name. It would have been Elizabeth's father.
Jameson.
That Jameson had done, and Elizabeth knew about it and was covering all of that up. So just tonight I started thinking about, what if that was his way of preventing what the Leviathan were going to try to do, and Victoria Winters was actually this sort of supernatural being that they were trying to create, except he did it first.
Right.
I liked the idea that you said of what if she had this innate ability to travel through time? That could be something that would explain that.
Yeah.
Well, I had listened to some of your podcast with Mr. McRae, where I was hearing some of his theories about the Leviathan, and this thought crossed my mind of she could travel through time and things like that, and she was sort of this being. What if it turned out that Victoria Winters, like somehow in the future, was the leader of the Leviathan? And
Yeah.
she was the one actually behind all of the Leviathan's plots against the Collins family in the past. And I was like, oh, that would be an interesting reveal. Like, dun dun dun, the big evil was Victoria all along.
Right. There, that's just it. There's just a whole world of possibilities. We don't know. Again, it would be a hell of a twist and a hell of a reveal. I think that's the thing. It's like there's so much not known about not just one character, but a bunch of characters. Whether we don't know Victoria's actual lineage. We don't, you know, we know Elizabeth knows about her, but we don't get into how she exactly knows about her.
Right.
There's so again the possibility of this person being connected to this or this person being connected to that is just that it's one hell of a possibility.
Right. Yeah, I love it. And it just there's so many possibilities. And there's so many ways to look at Dark Shadows. I really like this kind of speculation. Dean Edwards and Lynn Edwards, I liked the way that they were looking at it through a very historical perspective. Like, what else was going on in the world at this time to put what we're seeing in a greater, picture? I thought that was really interesting. I like speculating with a lot of the occult stuff. That's one of my favorite part of Dark Shadows that I think that they just did so well in so many ways, and in such a unique way that you don't see on other shows, even to this day, really.
Yeah. Who's your favorite character?
Oh, that's such a hard question. The first one I always jump to is Laura. Laura Collins is just one of my favorites. I think that the idea and the concept of taking the Phoenix and making it in a human form is very unique and something you haven't seen and still don't see. And the way they pulled it off, I really liked Laura Collins.
I love how you said about Laura, because it's funny when they were making a movie called Sun. It stars Andy Matichak or Matichak. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I apologize. I was hoping this was going to be the Phoenix, but it wasn't. I was disappointed. I'm like, son of a bitch.
Right. It's one of those. It's a very popular myth, but one that you don't see done in modern times and modern media very much at all.
Do you think it's just not used because it's forgotten about, or just people don't want to use it?
I think one thing is, and it's one thing that I think Dark Shadows did, is that to make that creative leap of taking the Phoenix as a bird, well, here it is as a person.
Right.
I think that's one thing. And the Phoenix, I think, is one creature that's sort of unique to that. Maybe hard to do that with other mythological creatures. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I like the idea of exploring that more, because I think that was a really unique device that they did. And just as well as Laura especially really shows that idea of generational, for lack of a better word, generational family trauma, and how it can get passed through the generations and affect, where you see David, Penny Dreadful, I think, talks about it on one of her podcasts, how David, after his mother dies in flames, kind of goes through this psychological change. He becomes a lot less psychotic.
Yeah.
You know.
He's not trying to 86 Roger by removing the bleeder valve. That's
Right. Yeah. And just like, I mean, boy, early on, David he is an intense little kid. That first scene when he comes down the stairs, and I think it's his first line in the whole show, and he just goes like, I hate you. And you're like, holy crap.
it could have went way worse. I mean, he could have went Michael Myers on her and just not said shit and then started stabbing her.
Oh, I mean, honestly, you look at David and you're like, boy, I think he really lucked out with getting Victoria Winters at that point in his life, because
Yeah.
otherwise he was on a whole nother trajectory.
That kid was on the serial killer slope of potential.
Right. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Like the Durst plan. Um, man. Yeah. But Victoria does, she really, one thing that I really love about her that I feel sometimes that Victoria gets misrepresented. I feel like you hear a lot of times people talking about Victoria Winters being the perpetual victim. And although people try to victimize her, one of the things that I love about her is you don't see her ever become a victim because of what she's gone through. Right. She constantly comes through it stronger and more resilient, which again is such a Collins family trait, I feel. Yep.
I think that's the thing. Like, here's this woman. When people ask, who's your favorite final girl? I'm like, Victoria Winters.
Right.
Because she gets put through so much shit. Like, not just personally, but emotionally, physically. I mean, she has to deal with Ghost, a Phoenix, David, Roger. I mean, a lot of it.
Oh, and even Elizabeth. There are scenes early on that I'm like, wow, the gaslighting is painful to watch. Where like, and it's Elizabeth doing it to Victoria, where you're like, what are you doing? Like, this is so evil, but it's also just part of the culture, you know?
It's like, woman, you bought that girl here. You brought
yeah. And then to be like, no, I'm sorry, you have to completely deny your senses. You know, you're like, what are you saying?
It's like, when you look up shrill, you will see a picture of Elizabeth. I mean, she's just so shrill to Vicky.
Oh, I love Elizabeth too. She is one of my favorite characters too, but that's one of those things where there are very few characters that really never do anything bad. Even Victoria occasionally does things that you're a little like, ooh, I question that decision. Yeah. You know, I think probably to me the biggest victim and the biggest tragic character in Dark Shadows is poor Joe Haskell. Like, geez, Louise, that guy tries to be so good and just gets his life destroyed.
He gets. I will give them credit that they don't kill off Joe, but they write him off by putting him in Wincliffe, and it's like, nah, I sort of wish you would have killed him off.
Now that's a character that we could see come back years later. Like boy, the Collins family could be in trouble if the state ever closed Wincliffe down and just released everybody. Right. You know, like, because I think they've got their own wing of like, we'll just make them go to Wincliffe and forget about them.
Right, because you have Joe goes there, Maggie goes there, and it's just like you never hear from them ever again.
Right. Willie Loomis, there are times later on in the series that I almost feel like the same way as Joe Haskell about him, where I'm like, geez, the abuse this guy goes through. But the only thing that balances it is how horrible he is at the beginning of the series, where you're kind of like, wow.
That's a friend of mine was. I said, when you get to episode 211, because he's watching it on Tubi, I said the description box is wrong. Willie is not a handyman. I said that's in the movie. I said, sure, he
Yes.
becomes a handyman, but when that episode's happening, yeah, he's not a handyman yet. He's still a
He's not
thief.
a handyman. No,
He's
like
still a thief.
he's uh uh almost predatory in the beginning. Like Willie is you really you get that feeling that he is dangerous, but then Barnabas comes along and is like, "Oh, no more willpower. Sorry, you're mine." And that really creates a change in him.
I love how Carolyn literally almost shoots him with Roger's revolver.
Yes, I love how Carolyn gets a little gun happy from time to time, and I kind of like that about her.
You got to channel your inner Paul Kersey and just pull the trigger, girl. Just pull the trigger.
Right, right. Carolyn, I love Carolyn too. I think that she's a really interesting character, especially when you're watching. She walks in and is such a breath of modernness. You know what I mean? Because even Vicky, the way she dresses and stuff, seems very not even dated, but just almost without date. It's very neutral. But then Carolyn comes in this lime green and mini skirt, and you're like, whoa. Although early on she's dancing at the at the Blue Whale too, which I love that. She's definitely one of the Collins that you see that she doesn't seem to be bothered by class. Like that's not part of her operating system, really. She realizes that she's wealthy, but she certainly doesn't seem to treat anybody as lower than her.
She's very carefree, and she just, you're right, she's sort of this free spirit who's literally living life to the fullest. I mean, she's literally partying it up at the Blue Whale, and she loves to have a good time, which I love. Here's this character that, with Vicky, it's about being this tutor to David and trying to live a regular life, but she's more about teaching this young kid and finding out about what's going on with her. And here's Carolyn just like carefree, like, I do want to ask you though, why? Okay, I know she doesn't want to leave with Joe, right? So she doesn't really need Joe to leave though. So why does she never leave?
I think that that's a good question, and I think there could be a variety of reasons. I think there probably are a variety of reasons. I think that even could be, though, where you see that echo of, again, kind of generational trauma. She grew up with a mother that never left,
Yeah.
and so as much as she wants to leave, I have a feeling that the outside world, especially outside Collinsport, is probably kind of scary to Carolyn. Think of her counterpart in Millicent,
Yeah.
who's from New York and from this big city, but is still very frightened and cloistered. You know.
I like. I love what you just said. Those are great points. Carolyn and her mom Elizabeth have this conversation after Vicky shows up, and she's sitting there. She goes, "I don't want to leave you here by yourself." Which I'm thinking, okay, she doesn't know Vicky right. Then Elizabeth tells her, "I won't be alone." She's like, "She came," so
She
she's shocked.
came.
You're right,
Yeah.
she's shocked. So, but after knowing that she came, meeting Vicky, she still makes no real effort to leave. I honestly think here's this woman who's looking at her mother. My mother's been here for 18 years waiting for that son of a bitch to come home. And you know what? I'm going to be here when that son of a bitch comes home. And then she's
Right.
waiting.
Right.
She's waiting for daddy to come.
Well, I do, and I think too, like you see over and over in Carolyn's relationships with Vicky, Joe, even Burke, this repeating pattern of it seems like she wants something, she wants that relationship, but
Yep.
then she gets scared and pushes them away.
Yep.
And that is a almost repetitive cycle with her. That again, I think comes from a lot of that upbringing, as well as just not being exposed to the world. Her exposure outside her home is Collinsport. The occasional trip to Bangor or Boston.
I remember a friend of mine put up a poll like F, Mary, Kill, and it was Joe, Haskell, it was Willie Loomis, and somebody else. I forget who for the men, and I forget who he did for the women. And I'm like, Joe's too willing to get married. There's such a thing. There's such a thing as somebody being too willing to get married.
He really, yeah, you can tell that Joe wants to settle down. I always sort of, my heart breaks a little, and they're probably my favorite Dark Shadows couple is Joe and Maggie. Yeah. I always wish that they could just get together and live happily ever after and have a boat and, all of that, but unfortunately that was not to be.
That's partially our good buddy Barnabas's fault too.
Yes, very much. Like, boy, yeah. And when Joe is under Angelique's thrall as the vampire Angelique, boy, you can see how much he suffers and struggles with that. Being under her control. But that's even part of his character. He doesn't want to just work for the Collins family for the rest of his life. He wants to get his own boat. He doesn't want to be under anyone's control,
Yep. He wants to get away, like have his own thing. And just
yes.
in many ways, he wants what Carolyn has, but he wants just to be him. He doesn't want to have, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, his whole life. And I'm with you. He just wants his own thing. What's your favorite musical score from Dark Shadows?
Return to the Blue Whale. I love that song. There's just something about it that I just love. I mean, the opening theme, of course, and I've actually, Dark Shadows is probably what first engendered it in me, but I've long been a lover of the theremin. And Dark Shadows absolutely gets the award for most use of theremin in a TV show.
I love how when they do the early episodes, you'll always hear like the sound of a boat or down, like you're down at the dock, like right before you're going into the Blue Whale or
well, I really think that's another way that Dark Shadows, I think, was really unique, and something that should be that hopefully they would pay attention to in a redo, is that music and the sounds were very important, but especially music. You had these different, whether it's Josette's music box or Quentin's theme. Yep. You had a variety of musical pieces that were actually the characters are listening to, but that are repeated and mean something, and they add this depth and continuity to so much of it, and I think that's a unique part of the show.
Do you think the Hand of Patofe is out there somewhere?
Yes. I love that idea that the hand would survive beyond Patofe, and could be inactive, could be active on its own, could be possessing someone. I think that the hand. That's another one of those things that's just so uniquely done in Dark Shadows that I don't really think you see many other places, is the idea of, here's this person that is apparently an occultist or acquired some kind of occult power that has somehow like focused it all into his hand. So that becomes the source of his power and very literally independent of him as a person. Yeah. very unique. I love the hand of Count Patafi for sure.
Because I I could see some idiot without a hand just picking this thing up and going, "Oh, I could make this my new hand," and not know what the hell it is, and
Absolutely.
the hand just possesses them to be evil.
Or I was even thinking something like either accidental, or you could go pretty dark and gritty with it and have some modern person that's got it that
Yep.
takes off their own hand in order to gain the power of Patafi, maybe even a modern, I would love to see a modern Aristide.
Yep.
I thought he was a very fun character in that period as well, like very unique. I was thinking about uh, there's a fellow I follow that's kind of a Dark Shadows fan as well, that early on kind of on Twitter got me interested in some of the fandom. I think his Twitter handle is at SA Gaston, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but he put a post up about he was watching the new Nancy Drew series and how he felt this very Dark Shadows vibe from it. And
Yeah.
so I kind of checked it out, and I can definitely see what he meant. Like, I really think that now is a good time that's ripe for that. And that could be done in so many fun ways with these characters in a more modern setting or modern iterations of them, and a modern day Aristide.
Yeah.
How to do that and how to pull it, like the character from the past, or is it his ghost or a modern descendant or what? But I would love to see something with that.
Well, here's something you could do too. Carolyn could be, they've talked. Sam Hall had wrote a TV guide for TV Guide what had become of the characters, and you could. He said Carolyn became obsessed with the occult. Maybe Carolyn comes obsessed with the occult and meets somebody who's a fellow obsessee and offers to help her. We don't really know much about the person wanting to help her, but this person has their own agenda, and that agenda is to find the hand. And
Right.
that's like you said, takes when they do find the hand, takes their hand off and wants it for themselves. I do think that's something that they could definitely play with easily.
Yes, absolutely. uh of course, I was watching Dark Shadows the other night because I seem to always have it on. But there was a scene that I thought was interesting. So I'll tell you about it, but my question would be, do you think this is a possibility? It was a scene between Magda and Beth.
Mm-hmm.
And she said something along the lines, Magda said something along the lines to Beth of, she was going to go, I think, read the cards for Miss Edith.
Yeah.
And then she kind of looked at her and said, but you wouldn't know anything about that. And Beth kind of gets flustered and walks away, and Magda laughs. And I started thinking, could Beth be almost like Ginny was, a gypsy that left the clans, and maybe Magda knows that about her?
I think Magda knows a lot more about people than she lets on. I
Yeah,
do think there's something to Beth. I think Beth had a somewhat ability to read the cards. I don't think she was as, we'll say, good at it as Magda. Sort
right.
of. I'll use another character as an example, and I hate to do this because they're totally different characters. But Beth and Natalie Dupre. Natalie could read the card. I think Natalie could read the cards, but was Natalie as good as Magda? No.
Right.
So I think Beth could read the cards, but literally just full on interpret and have some sort of power of knowledge of it, full knowledge. No.
Right.
I
But I'd
think
like to
that,
know what her history is like. Where did Beth come from?
yeah,
Why is she able to connect with Ginny so well? Things like that.
I think Beth, again, you want to talk about somebody who I think Beth had a kid or maybe had a miscarriage. You know, that's something we know Jenny doesn't actually have a miscarriage, but here's maybe Beth lost a kid and knows what, and even though she knows Jenny's kids are still alive, she understands Jenny's pain.
Right, right. Oh man, man, I could even see because it seems like Quentin and Beth had some kind of previous relationship.
Yeah.
Maybe she had a miscarriage and it was Quentin's and she never told him about it, you know?
Well, I got to tell you this straight up. Quentin Quentin is basically the James Bond of Turkish.
Right.
Quentin is the secret great great grandfather of both Lando Calrissian and and Han Solo.
He definitely is probably the most like smooth operator of the Collins family, you know. Besides him, I think you'd have to say like Nicholas Blair. You know,
Right.
he has a charm that just can't be beat. But
So it's like this. Quentin has so many women lined up, and yet he only has two kids. Yeah, he somewhere there are little Quentins around.
little Quentin's running around. Yes, absolutely. Well, think about the parallel time possibilities of all of Quentin's different possible children. You know, um, especially when you start getting into multiple Quentins. Yeah.
Oh my god, right? Like I could see Quentin traveling around. And here's the thing: Amanda Harris is the perfect example that she's created, and she's just another girl for Quentin. And
Yes.
I've often compared Amanda Harris to agent of the shadow named Harry Vincent. Now, not her creation, but her death. She's standing on the Brooklyn Bridge, and she jumps. Now, the difference would be Harry Vincent doesn't jump, but only because the shadow stops him from jumping and saves his life, and that's how the shadow recruits Harry Vincent. I've always found Amanda Harris strange, but post Amanda Harris, Quentin's out there in Europe, and literally only God knows how many women he's.
Oh, right. Or I mean, who knows what he and Laura were up to in Egypt? You know what I mean? That as well as the travels to Egypt and then his travels back. And yes, I think there's a possibility for that right there is a good possibility of Collins's across the world. You know, I mean, Carl obviously was somewhat of a ladies' man too, and was traveling too. We don't know what he was like before Pansy, but they certainly had a great love, you know. A crazy one, but a great one.
Right. But very so like poor Pansy gets killed. I love how Carl does not let her death go, and I give all the credit to John Carlin for just playing that to the T.
Yes, yes, so good. Like, and that's where when you first meet Carl, you're kind of like, what is this? Like, we're back in time, but there's this dude that's such a kook. Uh, and then through his relationship with Pansy, at first you're kind of like, oh man, he's really in love with her, and
Right.
she does not fit in. And then when she dies, you really see him bring a lot of depth to that character, where he really is broken by her death. You know.
Yeah, this ain't the guy holding the prop gun in.
Yeah. Oh
Right?
man, that prop gun is just what a what a fun, crazy thing to bring into that, you know.
Right.
I love it.
It's just. Is there anything you want to add?
Uh No, not really. Other than boy, if there are folks out there that are like, oh, I'm a fan, but maybe I haven't watched everything or this or that. Don't be afraid to get involved. The Dark Shadows fan community is so very open and welcoming, and I think we all love hearing everybody's different ideas and theories and how they could or couldn't work together. And I like one thing Mr. McCrae said about like a unified theory. I love that, where it's like, how do we make everybody's different ideas fit together? There's got to be a way.
Right, right. That's the thing. It's like Dark Shadows is, to me, the best community because it's just full of fans who want to talk to each other, and that's another reason I created this channel. I'm like, tell my wife, I'm like, I'm creating a channel, and I'm going to get people on here to talk to.
Totally, yeah. I think it's great.
This is an open door policy. I have an open door policy here, so it's like it's nice to like have that and just hey bring people on to talk to them, like fans like you and like John and Mark and Patrick, and thank you. I want to thank you for giving me your time tonight. Thank you so much, man.
Oh, thank you too. Yes, and as different topics come up, I'd love to come back and chat more. That would be great.
When I bring you back next time, I want to ask you, what fictional character would you ever bring to Collinsport? That's something to think about.
Ooh, that is a good question because they drew so much on fiction. I will put some thought into that, definitely.
Okay. He's at Magical Rod. You can get him on Twitter. Thank you, man, for stopping by. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, me too. I will talk to you later. Have a
You
good
have a
one.
great night.